listening to the Kobo Writing Life podcast, where we bring you insights and inspiration for growing your self-publishing business. We're your hosts. I'm Stephanie.
And I'm Joni. On this week's episode of the podcast, Steph and Tara interviewed super successful author Laurelin Paige, who is a New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and USA Today bestseller. Steph, how was your conversation?
It was great. We love talking to Laurelin. She had a lot of great tips for marketing, specifically about series and how she kind of rebrands an old series and the kind of marketing tactics she uses to add more sales. So free books or Prequels. She also talked to us about going wide. And also we asked her, since she is an established author, kind of her advice for other established authors and what they can do to kind of bring their self-publishing career business to the next level. So it was a great interview. We hope you enjoy it, and please keep listening. Thank you, Laurelin, for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to interact with people.
Yay. So to start us off, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I am a New York Times bestselling author, also internationally bestselling, USA Today, Wall Street Journal. Have all my letters. That's what CD Reese always calls that. Have all my letters. I majored in musical theater, which I like to mention because it definitely is how I learned to write, was from studying story from that aspect, from the theater aspect. And then I got my master's degree. I got an MBA, and it's in a marketing emphasis. I think that both those degrees together have really been the two things that have shaped my career, learning how to write stories and then learning how to sell stories. The two components have really been what I've relied on. Yeah. And here I am talking to you guys. I've been writing, I guess, since my first book published in 2013, and I just finished book 32, I think.
Wow.
Which will come out in August. So yay.
Have you ever written a musical?
You know, I when I was 13, yeah. and another one like when I was in high school, I was trying to write musicals. So, but not as an adult. You know what? It doesn't pay as well, I hear. So.
Oh, that's a shame. I would love to hear a musical of yours. I know, Steph, you're a big musical fan as well.
This makes sense because I saw on your website all your Spotify playlists, and I'm like, all right, for each book.
Yeah.
I see the love of music there.
Definitely. Have them for every single book. I have to have my playlist. Even sometimes I use them to give me in the mood as I'm playing, which is generally the case. Like these are the songs that get me in the mood that I'm looking for. But even if I didn't end up relying on music while I was writing, I will go back and create one afterwards.
I love playlists.
Oh, nice. I'll have to check those out. I love a Spotify playlist.
It's our nerdiest love Spotify playlist.
So when you went from your MBA in marketing, that's sort of like the perfect background to go into running your own business. Is that kind of what led you into writing? Were you traditionally published first, or did you go independently at the beginning?
I was independent. I had several jobs at the time. I was doing some marketing jobs. I was also working in a church as a music director and balancing all of that. But then I also had my youngest daughter, who was born in 2009, is autistic. And when she was really little, she just didn't sleep ever, really bad sleeping. So I ended up needing something to like fill my time when I was staying up really late with her all the time, and something that would keep me interested to stay awake. And so I started writing full-length books then. I started writing a couple of middle grade novels, like, you know, Harry Potter age fantasy. And I had some people, some agents sort of show interest, but nothing that really took hold. And so finally I was like, you know what, I think I'm just going to write an adult novel, romance novel, just kind of for myself. And maybe I could get like a little small press deal. And so I did that. And my first thing was a small press deal. And I had that deal before I self-published, but it hadn't published yet. So I took my second manuscript and self-published it while I was waiting for my traditional to come out. And it was that second book that really exploded. So I really leaned more self-published since then, though I have had a few traditional deals. And definitely when I had that first self-published book, I used my marketing, like everything I knew from my marketing background. I just kind of dug in and made sure that everybody knew about my book.
You're just like plastering it everywhere. You're like, I have a book.
Yes. And that was before Facebook ads. So it was, you know, grassroots kind of stuff, reaching out to bloggers on Goodreads, emailing people all the time, like, do you want my book? Giving away so many copies, which is where I kind of learned how free works so well, is because of those early days. Giving away so many copies really led to more more sales and more people finding the series.
Had you always intended it, like once you had success with that second book, is that when it kind of clicked to you that a series is the way you wanted to go? Or was that always what you had in mind?
No, actually, it was after the first book was successful. I ended that book in a way where I thought, okay, this book could end here and it would be fine. But it was not really fully into the relationship, so I could also go on with it. And so after that one was so successful, I was like, yep, I'm writing a book too. And I'm glad.
Yeah.
Now it's 5 books. It was originally going to be 1 book, and then it turned into, okay, I guess I'll do a trilogy. And then it ended up at 5. And that seems to be a great number for it.
Is this the same couple, or do you switch?
It's the same couple for this
okay.
one.
That's kind of, I don't see that as often anymore, which I find interesting now.
Yeah, especially it seems like the trilogies that happen with the same couple or the multi-books of the same couple, they're always planned with a cliffhanger right from the beginning. I mean, even me, like I will plan like, okay, book 1 has a cliffhanger. But that first series, the fixed series, like I said, it wasn't really a cliffhanger ending, and it still inspired a lot of readers to go to book 2. It still inspires readers to go to book 2. And I sometimes wish that I need to learn to remember that. I need to learn to go back and look at that it doesn't have to be a cliffhanger. If you make people fall in love with that same couple, you still can write additional books about them and still have people read through.
Yeah, I think that's good advice, because sometimes people get really caught down of like you had, certain rules for keeping readers hooked on everything, and that a cliffhanger is almost essential. But no, it definitely isn't. And I kind of like that you're saying that the series kind of keeps growing. I feel like authors, like, not that the series kind of gets away from them and has its own life because you're building it, but you know what I mean? Like you didn't intend it to be 5 books, but it's just like, oh, now we have another book.
Yes. And that's kind of, you have to really weigh how that goes. Like there are some series, I think, where people say, oh, that author's just milking it. And so you have to really, I have to personally balance and say, is the story, just because people are asking for the story doesn't mean that there is a real good story for me to tell. And I have to wait until something comes up in my head where I'm like, oh, I really want to explore that with this particular couple, instead of just trying to force something on there. Right now, I have a standalone. I don't write very many standalones, but I had a standalone come out in 2016, I think, Chandler. And I have a second story that I'm like, oh, I really want to, do I want to add it to it? I think I do. It keeps calling to me. So I think eventually it probably will end up being a series.
I'm wondering with series, do you have to weigh up like the creative behind it of how much you want to write the story versus do you have a benchmark in mind about what a successful book in a series would be? Like, is there certain aims that you go to with, say, book 5 that like, if you don't hit them, that you're like, maybe I'll just leave this series as a 5th thing, or is it more focused on the story itself?
It's a little bit of both. I definitely want the story to be a valid story that I want to tell that feels like it really would be an addition to the story instead of just dragging it out, like I said. But that is the one thing like that is kind of stopping with Chandler. I have to look at the numbers and I keep on saying, is this worth my time to write the story that I want to write? And that is a balance that you have to look at, because I am a business. It is legitimately, we are here as business people. And writers are in different situations. I mean, there are some writers who are doing this full time and they're supporting their entire families. There are some people who are doing it full time, but they're single and they have nobody else but themselves. And there's people who have spouses that are married and that are working and that don't have to feel the burden of how much money it makes. And I think that makes a big difference where you're coming from as an author. And that's because there's not one size that fits all. If you don't have to have the economic weight on your shoulders, then yeah, by all means, if it's right by your heart, then right by your heart all the time. But I have 6 people that live in my household. My mother lives with us. I have 3 children, my husband. I am the only person who earns any money. And I have an extensive team of people, employees that count on me for an income. And so looking at the numbers and justifying whether or not a book will potentially earn enough to be worth it is something I definitely spend time on.
Yeah, that must be very hard to balance, I think. But I was listening to your presentation at InkersCon, and I saw you at Romance Author Mastermind last year, and you have a great talk about what makes a successful series. and our kind of about like rebranding series. But what really struck me was you were saying about how people need to change their idea of an indie author and actually rephrase it to like being an indie publisher. And I thought that was really a great way of looking at it, because we almost, it's not like we're brushing things off when we say indie author, but it takes away the business aspect of everything. And especially if you were planning a series or doing things beforehand. So yeah, that's just something I wanted to point out as a thank you for that, and advice if people hadn't heard that before. Think of yourself as indie publishers.
Yes, I definitely think that it changes your mindset a lot to be able to say indie publisher. And because some of the things that I think indie authors do are they look at the numbers for their week release or the month that they release, and they're really focused on units, where units really don't mean anything to a publisher. If you look at traditionally published people, the units are important for getting books ordered from big companies, but more than the units, they care about the dollars. They care about how much income came from it, because it's definitely different to have a 99-cent book and, have a lot of units at a 99-cent price range than a book at $6.99 and having far fewer units. So I really encourage indie authors who really need to worry about the economy, the economic benefit of their writing, to get away from units and start always looking at your dollars. That's one thing for looking at publishers, but also looking long term instead of just what is the book that I want to do right now. Always looking at every book that you're writing, try to decide how it will fit into your arsenal of books, like what kind of weapon it's going to be. Is this going to be a weapon that draws people in? Is it going to be like this book is the one that's going to get more readers to the rest of my books? Or is this going to be a book that is like from the heart, but I give it special attention in different ways? Treating it like that from the very, very beginning is, I think, the best way to be like a publisher.
I guess this is a good segue into a series. So let's say author had a series that it didn't do as well as they thought it would. Is there ways that they can get the most out of a series, either by rebranding or making it more successful a second time around? Like, what are some tips they can do to achieve that?
Yes. And the thing I want to say first about that, about a series performing poorly or a book performing poorly, that when you compare actual numbers, some people will be like, that didn't really perform poorly. That was poorly is subjective, is the point. And so this idea of being able to get more money from it is not based on how much money it made the first time. It's based on what were your expectations? Did it meet the expectations you have? If it did not meet those expectations, how can you better use it to meet expectations? So I like to say that rather than a book that didn't perform as well as you wanted. There are so many ways to get it a new life, and you can rebrand it. You can give new covers to them. You can possibly go in and delve into the writing. If there was editing problems, maybe re-edit it. You can reposition it by just changing the price point. Obviously, lots of times we change the price point and we go down and we're like, oh, I'm going to get new readers by 99 cents or by free. But you can also get new readers, believe it or not, by pricing up, as long as the perceived value goes along with it. So if you were a $3.99 book and now you want to reach some new readers at $6.99, you have to make sure the book looks like it's a $6.99 book. But there's so many ways you can reinvigorate life into a series.
I love the idea of pricing up higher, because I think independent authors and publishers, as I train my brain to change how I say that, tend to sometimes undervalue their work. And it is all about perception. And, at Kobo, we don't differentiate between indie authors and non-indie books. They're all melded together. And as a customer, you would never know. So if you think about the customer perception of your book is the same as any other book from a publisher, if you're giving it the same solid cover. So I think that's great advice to sort of look into, where do you want to be? And are you pricing along the lines of like where you want to be perceived within like your genre?
Yes, and it doesn't work for everyone. I had a friend that's a very successful author who recently I told her, I think you should price your second books higher. And she did it for a couple of days. And she said she just didn't. She felt like the drop-off was too much. But again, then I hope that you're looking at dollars and not units, because your units are going to drop when you go higher in price. But are you still making more? I have gone higher priced. Once upon a time, my books were, I sold a whole trilogy for 99 cents for a long, long time. And then I was really a $3.99 author. But now I'm more like $5.99, $6.99. And my units did drop off as I climbed higher, but my income did not. And that won't necessarily be true for everyone. It depends on, again, like how, if the customers can perceive that value. I think it's easier to make that transition if you are still less known. So if you were at a place, a crossroads kind of in your career, and you're like figuring out, how am I going to go forward and reach new people? That might be something you want to explore. Maybe you can get that higher price.
It's interesting that you said she noticed in 3 days. Is it that quickly that you would notice something, or maybe
I don't think so.
That was
I don't think so. I wanted her, and I have another friend. I have two friends that have done this, and like after 3 days, they were like, no, and they changed. I think you have to give it a month.
I was going to say 3 days. That's not a lot of time.
Yeah, I think it has to be a month at least. I really think you don't notice till probably more like 3 months, because there is the sticker shock right away when people just saw you at $3.99 and now they see you at $5.99, and there is this standing away from it. But give like 3 months, and then you get new people looking at your product page. You get new people that never saw that you were at $3.99. And then you just have to get some of those first people to buy and then recommend to their friends, because that's really what it takes, is that word of mouth to justify that new price. So if you're making those changes, I do think that you need to give it more time.
Yeah, I know. 3 days. I can barely think about what I want to have for dinner in 3 days' time. It's sort of like changing what you're like, right, checking trends in that such quick a way. But I guess, yeah, people are hungry for data. So I guess that you can see some sort of trend, but yeah, maybe not that much in 3 days.
Yes. The problem is just you can sometimes see data, but you just don't know what it's caused by in 3 days. You have to see a longer period of time.
So you mentioned Prequels, and I was wondering if you could go a bit into that a little more.
Yes. Prequels are what we've started calling books that are the prequels to your series that you give away for free. I love the term prequel.
I know. I love when a new word comes along that's just perfection. You're like, yes. That is the perfect word.
I know a lot of authors who do this very successfully. They'll write a series and then they'll go back afterwards and write a prequel and release it free to drive a new audience to that series, which I think is a great way to do series. But there is sometimes the feeling that prequel is not necessary to the story. It's not essential. And so a lot of people won't pick it up. They know right away, even before they purchase any books. They're like, oh, that's just a little advertisement, is what some people start to look at it as. So I even prefer the prequels that are always intended to be part of the story from the very beginning, and that have essential information. And then you put that out because readers do know that it's a necessary part of the story. And in fact, when I do that as a prequel, I will also include that prequel in book 1 because it's essential and you need to have it to read the story. So I'll just have if you already read this part, skip to part 2 of the book. But I think that really helps make sure that you're using the prequel in a way that's going to bring new audiences or bring an audience to your story. But with that caveat, the other does work. You can go back and write things in older stories and add them and use them to draw new audiences later on.
Would they generally be novella-sized when you've been doing them? Or do you have prequels that are like full size as the same as any other edition in that series?
For me, novella size is what is the best that I can justify for the time spent on something I'm giving away for free. And novella size can be, I know Lauren Blakely does novellas that are like 7,000 words. Mine are more like 17,000 words for this kind of a prequel. I have a prequel planned in the future that will probably be more like 25,000 words. One thing, though, to keep in mind when you are writing a prequel is that if you one day want to get a book bub on it, it needs to be at least 40,000 words.
Oh,
so
didn't realize that.
So you have to, if you're making long-term strategy, like a publisher, and you're looking in the future, how will I eventually sell this? How will I eventually be able to position this? Now, BookBub is not the only place where you can get great sales driven. Of course, there's other places that don't care about that length. Free Booksy is awesome. I use them all the time, and they don't care about the length. But that's just something to keep in mind when you're using a tool like that.
Has having like a free book as part of your marketing strategy, has that changed how you're writing a series in your mind? Like, do you know what the prequel will be prior, now that you know that that's the direction that you want to go in and that your readers are used to?
Yes, definitely. I plan things now based on, I plan things not even just a free prequel. Like I just finished a 4-book series. And as I was writing that 4-book series, I knew all the time, one day book one will probably be free, either permanently or for a period of time. Right now, I've been giving it away a lot through other authors' newsletters because I know in some ways it was really a trilogy with a prequel like that I wrote from the whole time. And that helped justify like how much time I spent on the rest of the series. I also have plans in the future, and I think about, okay, is this story that I want to write, does it have a part of the story where a natural break that would make a natural, enticing prequel? And a duet that I have coming up in the fall does have a nice beginning break. And so I'm kind of toying with doing a prequel with that and breaking it off. Nice. So yeah, planning ahead and planning not just like, how do I make a prequel and then put it into this story, but also looking at your story, because story for me still comes first.
Yeah.
So I like to look at the story that I'm planning to tell and then looking for opportunities in that story.
Yeah, I do like when there's a 0.5, even like, I don't think it matters where, but when you can tell that like an author's just been really excited and they're like, oh, we're just going to give you a little bit more between these stories, that it must be fun as a writer as well to be able to kind of like maybe write like a little side story or something that's still related.
Yes.
Yeah.
Especially because if you really get to know those characters, that becomes easy to write them. So that ends up being, again, a tool as an author that, I need a break right now, because we get burned out, we get tired, we write things that are really hard, really challenging, and then you need something that's a little bit less intensive. And so sometimes going back to those old characters that are really easy to generate new words for is kind of a helpful little tool that you can rely on.
I've noticed a lot of authors employ that in their like newsletters or at the end of their book. They'd be like, here are the free bonus stories from like past couples. So I enjoy reading them a lot.
Yes. Yeah. I use a lot of those bonus scenes. You can use them for lots of different things. You put them on your newsletter and you can generate people from your newsletter to like pick up books that they might not have picked up, or even just to make them happy so that they're more likely to open your newsletters in the future because you have content in there. There's so many ways that you can use those stories.
So you mentioned that your first book was published in 2013, and I'm just wondering if your marketing strategy has changed since then, or how has it evolved? Anything? This might be too broad of a question, but.
Well, first of all, like I said before, Facebook ads weren't around. So that was definitely a big change. Now Facebook ads and Amazon, any of the ads weren't really around as being available to indie authors. So now advertising is a huge component of my marketing. And then it was more grassroots of reaching out and finding people who were big influencers on Goodreads and reaching out to them directly. That is no longer really kosher. At that point back then.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah. Back then people.
Submissions, maybe? Is that what we would say?
Yes, exactly. Back then people were like, yes, give me a free book. I'd love to have somebody reach out to me. An author, that's awesome. But then, everybody started doing it. So those kind of tactics do have to evolve all the time, because once everybody starts doing certain things, they do sometimes diminish the way that the effectiveness. And so I'm always looking at that.
Yeah, I always think it's funny with that, because indie authors and publishers are so willing to share the things that do cause success. So I do wonder that at the other side, like, is there also something that hinders it because, you're saturating this like idea that
the poor Goodreads reviewers.
Exactly. Like now everyone's, it's the bookstagram or the booktubers. Is that where the secrets are now? Like,
yes. Oh my gosh. It does feel like that a lot of times. There are things where you always have to think, this is a tool that's working so well. Do I really want to share it with other people? And I kind of feel guilty when I have that feeling, because I think that one of the best things about, the romance community that I'm in is that it is so open, and probably because they're women, no offense to men, but that's definitely the way that women structure businesses rather than the way that men are really like keep things under the vest, and women are more like, let me tell you all the good things. So I don't want to become that real alpha kind of personality, but the instinct does come along. And I just try to remind myself that whatever tools that I have that are really working for me are eventually going to be discovered by other people. And the best part about sharing it is that other people will share information with me, and that we can all continue to evolve with each other. And that I've learned so many things. I've gotten so many tricks because of that, because I've been willing to share information. So just really whenever I do something, I know that this is going to be a limited time that it's going to be useful. So take advantage of it while it's working.
Yeah.
And then and the other great thing about that, though, is that it goes in waves. So everybody will try to do bundles right now. Bundles are a big craze. And then people forget about bundles after they don't work anymore. And so in a year or two, you can go back to doing that old thing again, kind of cycle through tools.
Nice. I was having kind of that exact conversation at lunch at Romance Author Mastermind, where we had met last year, where I was just saying to some authors that I was sitting with, like, name another business where, one, there's this many successful women, and two, that this many successful women are getting up there and just like telling you how they got their success. Like, I just can't imagine another business where that's just completely normalized.
No, I can't either. And I love it. I mean, I think that's why we've grown so quickly, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So you talk a little bit about authors that are going kind of publishing wide as opposed to publishing just in one place. So if an author is, say, coming out of KU to dip a series into wide, do you have any kind of best practices, a couple of things that they should be doing or keeping in mind?
When you're going from one vendor to wide, I think that you really have to treat it like it's a new release again. Plan a new release tour, plan all the bloggers, get them involved. And it's also a good time then to potentially change a cover, change up your blurb, make the product look new in every way. Don't just expect that, I'm going to go from this vendor and then put it everywhere else and then people will just find me. You definitely have to put the work behind it. And the same thing, even if you're going wide versus and then going to one vendor afterwards. Mm-hmm. I mean, these treat the same way that you now treat it like a new product. So when you are trying to reach a new audience that you haven't tried before, that you haven't exposed yourself to, you want to kind of look at things that will help penetrate the market. So penetration pricing is one thing you might want to look at, which is lower pricing for one of your books. When I've taken a series out of Kindle Unlimited and put it at wide, then sometimes I like to try to put book one at 99 cents or free, get some heavy advertising behind it, BookBubs if you can, free Booksy, and then launch it like, here's my series and here's a blog tour with it and get book one for free and draw people in that way. So really, I think most important is to just think about making it a new product. How do you make it seem like a new product?
I love that idea. Do you split up your newsletter by vendors? Is that how you keep track of that? Or do you just do it through your targeting of ads?
I do it through both. I have done splitting up my target and splitting up my newsletter based on what people clicked on, and I didn't find it useful enough to me. I think too many readers are going back and they go back and forth. Some readers really do. I have readers say to me like, I have all of this author's books on my Kobo and I have all of these books on my Apple. Like, I don't understand how people decide to do what their methods are. So I don't do it that way. I tend to do targeting in my advertising. If I'm doing BookBub advertising, not their featured deals, but their advertising console, you can really narrow down. And I really love that feature, being able to like, here's Kobo people. There's some targets that like, they're great on Kobo. And then there's some other targets that are really great on Google Play. And like, you can target down that way. But if I'm doing a Facebook ad, I've started to include all the links to everything all the time in those ads for a wide ad. So that's kind of how I recommend reaching people, is to just include all your links when you're going wide on everything. Include on every post that you make, on all your ads, include all the links to give people options.
And are you still very hands-on with your marketing, or is it a team that you're working with?
I'm still really hands-on. I did take my marketing in-house. I was with a publicist before and I took it in-house. But one of my assistants that I've worked with for a long time, I worked with her before. She was my assistant and then she started her own publicity company. So that's Candy Cane PR. So I have a publicist on my team. And just recently, I've also hired Valentine PR to do some things for me as well, because I've known Nina for a long time and worked with her and would love to work with her on some side projects. But the majority of my stuff is in-house. So I am very hands-on about, I still do all my own advertising. I think about giving it to other people all the time and just think that I don't think anyone can do as good of a job at my advertising as as I can.
I think you probably enjoy it as well. Like, you're
Yes.
smiling a lot when you're talking about it. I think, do you get a kick out of like knowing that this ad is going to nail it?
Yes, I do. It's like it's its own creative project.
Yeah.
And I think that if every author looks at the creative aspect of marketing, they might actually be more enthused about it. Because I think that probably any author would be the best publicist for themselves because they know their book more than anybody else does. That doesn't mean I think they should all do their own marketing because of their other strengths or because of how they want to divide their time. I don't think that, again, there's a one size fits all. But if you are somebody who doesn't have anybody doing marketing, you can't afford to employ anybody on marketing and you dread the marketing, like it's writing miniature little books. I mean, it's writing miniature little stories and selling a story and telling your story in a different way. So if you can find that joy about it, yeah, I love it. I love to do it.
What do you think has been the best thing you've done for your business?
Probably the best thing has been to be willing to pivot when needed and start looking long term. I think long term versus short term was one of the best things I ever did because it was really depressing to just look at individual releases like, oh, this release, especially because my first indie release was bonkers. It was one of the most downloaded books of 2014 in People magazine. And so I already know that there's not going to ever be a book like that for me. Like realistically, probably not. That's especially just because of the time that was people, there wasn't as many people, right? The pond was a smaller pond. There's just not going to be that again. So if you look at just your releases that way, like I'm downhill for the rest of my life, the rest of my career, there's never going to be that high moment again. So instead of looking at that, changing my outlook to be how do all these books act together? How does my income act? How do the books lead into each other? And looking at how things are going to be like a year from now rather than just this release month. That's probably been the best thing that I have done.
I think looking a year ahead is great advice because if you were looking, say, like on a monthly basis, like just for myself personally, it would mean that like there's always some deadline that you're frantically hitting. And not that you're not trying to hit deadlines, but if you have a broader calendar of things, like even looking at something quarterly, maybe that's just a mental adjustment in my head, but it just makes it seem a little bit more achievable because you have more time.
Yes. And when you start to have a big backlist, and you think like, oh, what should I be advertising? What should I be focusing on? What should I be, whatever? You don't want to let things die and forget about it altogether. I think having like a year plan helps make sure that you are alternating what you're focused on instead of trying to worry about all of it all the time. There are things that I think, oh, that's a really good idea. I really want to try that new thing, but I have so many things I'm looking at right now. And so if I can go, okay, I'm putting that on my calendar for November, then I don't have to spend a lot of time worrying about it now. It doesn't have to take my energy, but I know that I'll still get to it. So looking a long time in the future is very helpful.
And we were going to ask you about advice for like veteran writers. I guess that's probably something that you would advise is to kind of like looking ahead a year. Is there any other advice that you have for people that have been in this game for a little while?
Yes, veterans really realize that the business changes. So don't compare your current standings to what your current standings were like 2 years ago. That's one of the biggest things. Realize that the landscape has changed and that that's natural in any sort of market, in any sort of business, that there is this part where business becomes saturated and it doesn't mean anything about your books or about your quality, because that's different from other businesses too. There's a lot of self-worth that comes when you attach that to your numbers. And that really happens to me, I find, with the veterans, because they once had bigger numbers and now they're sharing the pie, and there's more people that they have to share the pie with. So detach your self-worth from your numbers. That's number one. And then start looking at everything that you write as you're writing it. Decide how you are going to use it as a tool, as a business tool. You've been writing enough books by now that you understand that it's not just about your passion. It's not just about getting the words there. You understand that there is a business side to it. So instead of hating that part of it, embrace it and try to figure out how you can weave that into the story that you want to tell. from the very beginning. That's not something that I think you need to worry about as a beginning author. As a beginning author, I think you need to worry about the craft and getting the words on the page, getting the product out there, figuring out what kind of voice you have and what kind of stories you want to tell. So this is definitely veteran authors pivot so that you look at this as a business every day when you're writing. It's a business.
Awesome. I think that's great.
Thank you.
Now we've moved on to my favorite question. What have you been loving lately? It can be a book, movie, TV show, anything you think other people should check out.
Oh my gosh. We just finished The Great on Hulu. Oh my gosh. It's fantastic. It's about Catherine the Great. And so it's period, but it's hilarious. It's treated with modern sensibilities, and it's awesome to see the current politics and nature of the world, but reflected like in a different time period. So it's kind of removed from yourself. So you can laugh at it without feeling like, oh my gosh, this is really real life and it's depressing. But putting it in a different era really helps detach yourself and look at it really comically. And it kind of, I don't know, it's really helped me deal with the world that we live in right now.
Nice. When you said period, I didn't realize that you would be like, and it was hilarious. I thought you'd be like, it would be touching, made me cry. I love that idea of like a funny period.
It's fantastically funny. If you saw the movie The Favorite, which was nominated for Academy Award a couple of years ago, it's the same people, the same creators. So it's that same sort of just funny. But we've also been enjoying What We Do in the Shadows.
Oh, yeah. I haven't watched the series yet. That's on my list. I love that movie, though.
The movie was hilarious. I guess I'm really kind of leaning towards comedy right now because it's a time when we need to laugh.
We all need it.
But I also just finished this season of Killing Eve, and I love Killing Eve. Book-wise, I've picked up my first Serena Montgomery novel, so I'm reading that, that was the pen name for Stacey Abrams, who is a politician in Georgia. So I've been really enjoying reading that book. I didn't know. And I just learned that recently. And I was like, oh, wow. And I love politics. So another politician who was a romance writer, I want to get into that. So that's my book choice that I would recommend right now.
Perfect. And then what can readers expect from you next? Or what are you working on now?
On Monday, I'm going to dive into writing my Man in Charge duet, which will come out in the fall. It's kind of loosely based on the movie Working Girl,
nice,
which I loved. I kind of loved a retelling sort of, and I think that'll be really, really fun. It'll be lighter than the last series that I just did, which was kind of a edgier, darker series. And so I'm kind of excited. I'm excited about that. Before that, I have a 1001 Dark Nights novella coming out in August, which is exactly the opposite. It is not light. I just finished it 2 weeks ago, and it's, I think, a very important story. It kind of focuses on depression, romance and depression, which is, like I said, not a light story. It's a heavy story, but it's short, and I think it ends very hopefully. So hopefully readers will check that out.
Awesome. And where can they find you? All over the interwebs, Facebook, Insta?
I'm on Insta daily. On my Facebook page, mostly promo wise. Sometimes I'll pop into my readers group. I am an introvert, so I kind of stay off of social media altogether. But if you are on Insta and you post something and I like it, it's definitely me that's liking it, not a team member. So if you want to reach out to me, message me there. It might take me several days to get to you, but there I am. Also, my website, there's a form to email me if you ever want to email again. That will be me emailing you back. Those are the best ways to connect with me. I'm not on Twitter, so Facebook, Insta.
Great. Well, thanks very much for chatting with us.
Thank you for having me. It's always nice to chat with other industry people.
Thank you for listening to the Kobo Writing Life podcast. If you're looking for Laurelin's books, we'll include links in our show notes. And if you're looking for advice on growing your self-publishing business, you can head over to kobowritinglife.com.
This episode was produced by Tara Kremen and Stephanie McGrath. This episode was edited by Kelly Robotham. Music was provided by Tearjerker, and special thanks to Laurelin for being a guest on our episode. If you're ready to start your self-publishing journey today, sign up for free at kobo.com/writinglife. Until next time, happy writing!